Well, this community, of course, grieving the 4 teens lost in the mass shooting here just yesterday. Tate Meir, Madison Baldwin, Hannah St. Juliana, and Justin Schilling, all victims of what the prosecutor calls a premeditated attack.
Yes. Sheriff's office. Safe to come out.
Yeah, he said it's safe to come out.
Now, we're not willing to take that risk right now. I can't hear you. We're not taking that risk right now. Okay, well, come to the door with my man, bro.
Yeah, bro.
He said bro.
He said bro. Red flag.
As societies become more egalitarian, the differences between men and women increase rather than decreasing. And that happens for personality. The reshaping of society on an egalitarian basis with equality of outcome for everyone. All these unbelievably pathological and divisive and deadly ideas.
But one thing I'm not getting, there's a big difference between letting people do something for themselves and saying men should be dangerous. By dangerous, that implies I should be ready to threaten someone, to hurt somebody.
No, you should be capable of it, but that doesn't mean you should use it. There's nothing to you otherwise. Like if you're not a formidable force, there's no morality in your self-control. If you're incapable of violence, not being violent isn't a virtue. People who teach martial arts know this full well, right? If you learn a martial art, you learn to be dangerous, but simultaneously you learn to control it. Both of those come together. And the combination of that capacity for danger and the capacity for control is what brings about the virtue. Otherwise you confuse weakness with moral virtue. I'm harmless, therefore I'm good. It's like, no, that isn't how it works. That isn't how it works at all. If you're harmless, you're just weak. And if you're weak, you're not going to be good. You can't be, because it takes strength to be good. It's very difficult to be good.
And your critics, your female critics say, you men are already stronger than we. You abuse us, and you're encouraging that.
No, well, that's definitely not the case. I mean, I've had tens of thousands of people write me now and say that, they've taken my message to heart. They were nihilistic or addicted or aimless or having trouble in their relationships or not moving forward with their partners, their wives or girlfriends. And they've been trying to develop a vision for their life and to take responsibility and to quit using deceit, and they're better for it. There's no downside to that for anyone, men and women alike. And most of the reason that men have been coming to my lectures is, I think part of that's just an arbitrary baseline fluke. Almost all the people who watch YouTube are men. It's like 80%, 75, 80%. It's about the same for me. So it might be that my message is particularly attractive to young men, or it might just be that, I was particularly popular on YouTube and that's mostly a male domain.
Yeah, it's popular with young men because you're saying, yeah, go ahead, abuse women.
No, I've never said anything like that, and I think that's it really has nothing to do with transgender people or except peripherally the transgender issue. It's complicated because the legislation that I objected to also writes a social constructionist view of human identity into the law.
Social constructionist? Nobody knows what that means.
The theory that underlies the proclamation that gender identity is only a social construct, is only something you learn, it's only a performance, that it has no grounding in biology. That's wrong. Now it's written into our law.
Why is it wrong? Lots of people believe this. If it weren't for our sexist society, we'd be much more alike.
That's actually not the case. The science on that is absolutely clear. So as societies become more egalitarian, and this is mainstream science, by the way, this isn't pseudoscience, this is mainstream science, and it was discovered by people who are basically liberal or left-leaning, so it went against the grain, which is part of the reason why it's actually reliable. As societies become more egalitarian, the differences between men and women increase rather than decreasing. And that happens for personality. It happens for spontaneous interest, like the domain of your interest, which is basically people versus things. And it happens for the probability that women will enroll in STEM fields. So the more egalitarian the society, the lower the probability that women will enroll in STEM fields. Well, contrary to the desires of the researchers who generated the data, because no one wanted that. It came as a shock to everyone, but that's how it is.
That's what they found.
And those papers have been cited. They've studied tens of thousands of people in dozens of countries, and the papers have been cited thousands of times.
And yet when you say this, it infuriates some people.
No, it should infuriate them because I'm going right after the heart of the radical leftist doctrine. So it's no wonder they're infuriated.
The radical leftist doctrine, which is,
Well, partly it is that human identity is purely learned. And the reason that radical leftists believe that is because they believe that if there's no central human nature, then human beings can be transformed sociologically, politically, into the image that the radical leftists would prefer.
which would be,
Oh, God only knows, the new man or some bloody thing like that. The sort of thing that the communists were touting back in the 1920s. The reshaping of society on an egalitarian basis with equality of outcome for everyone. All these unbelievably pathological and divisive and deadly ideas.
and so for challenging this, they call you a transphobic piece of shit.
Yeah, that's one of they've called me lots of things. Hitler, that was one. I was either Hitler or Milo Yiannopoulos, and that was one of so which is quite the insult, eh? You're either Hitler or Milo Yiannopoulos. The bloody leftists, they can't even get their insults straight.
And you look pretty calm while they're screaming at you.
Yeah, well, better to be calm most
You
of the
said
time.
it's best to let the unreasonable opposition speak.
Because they manifest themselves as unreasonable. And then everyone can see it.
But everybody doesn't see it.
No, but lots of people see it. The first video that I was featured in, let's say, that went viral, which has had about 4 million views, was taken by some protesters. They accosted me after a free speech rally at the University of Toronto that emerged after I made my videos objecting to Canadian legislation. And they videotaped it. They were calling me out on my hypothetically bigoted stance with regards to this legislation, and they put it online, and 4 million people have watched it, and the comments are 100 to 1 negative. I mean, the protesters put it up because they thought it would discredit me, but that didn't work at all. And all the protests that have been leveled against me, some of which were quite ugly, especially the ones that won at Queen's University, have had, I would say, exactly the opposite effect of that which was intended.
Ugly because
It was dark. We were in a hall. It was kind of a church-like hall. There was about 900 of us that had come to hear myself and another professor speak, and the hall was lined with stained glass, big stained glass windows, probably 10 feet high, and the protesters, say 10 of them along the one side, the protesters climbed up on the window wells and pounded on them quite forcefully for 90 minutes. And so from inside, one of them pounded on the window hard enough to break it and cut herself and left blood on the window, and she was later arrested carrying a garrote, which was not exactly, that's not exactly a defensive weapon. Anyways, so for everybody inside, all we could see were these shadowy figures against the stained glass pounding away, and the protesters outside were chanting such things as barricade the doors and burn it down, which if you know anything about 20th century history and about the fact that those sorts of things happened, then that's not exactly the sort of thing that's acceptable to be pronounced at a protest. So it was a creepy, dark protest, and nobody that was in that hall, 900 well-behaved university students who had come to hear a lecture, nobody who was in that hall is going to soon forget that. About 750,000 people have watched it now.